to do this session. I often found with the publishing industry that we don't do enough across, the industry. So I think this is a good example of how publishers can get more involved in the university and publishing studies, but also I think just more involved with PASA. I think it's great that we can do stuff like this for the benefit of the industry as opposed to just for the benefit of our own companies. That's my thing out the way. Okay, so brief introduction. I'm one of the publishing managers from Cambridge. We have a branch in Cape Town. It's an international education branch, which means we just make material for schools and teachers primarily. Myself, I'm interested in computing and coding, and I publish coding and robotics for South Africa and digital skills, and now more and more ICT skills for teachers. So you can see that kind of fits into what I'm doing now. And then I lead the digital production team and some of the English or the language publishing teams. So Dintle, my colleague, I think she's here in this call as well. My interest in AI actually came from starting to publish and develop materials for coding and robotics in South Africa, which has a small section in it devoted to AI and the Internet of Things. And so about the same time as I was preparing this material for publication, ChatGPT exploded everywhere, and I could immediately see that there were direct links between what we were doing in this subject. But then the more and more I got into AI, generative AI, I realized how important it will be to anyone whose job is to create content in whatever form. And I think publishers whose core content or core task is creating content, educational content, I think we need to be very aware of what is happening and how to leverage tools to create better books, better products, maybe more quickly to market, more efficient. There's so many different aspects of it, but I think if you don't jump in, you will definitely be left behind. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, I can go quite quickly through this if people already know this stuff, but I just want to talk about a prompt, how to make a good prompt, prompt templating, like a structured approach to writing a prompt, and then I'll give some very detailed examples. And then the last sort of section is actually looking at some potential use cases. And these are ones I've obviously put my experience and background in publishing, and then my interest in Gen AI, and I've tried to bring them together to say, what can we as publishers do and how can we do it? So I've got, I think, four little use cases. And then at the end of that, I'm not sure if it's going to be a full, definitely won't be a full 2 hours, but at the end of that, then I thought questions, discussions, that's where all the interesting stuff comes out. Okay, but first, why am I excited? So there's a number of reasons. The one reason is it's changing and developing so rapidly. And because of that, I think it's going to have a major impact on the world. And there's opportunities. You've already seen all over the place, people can automate certain parts of their jobs. And it's very low tech in its approach. You chat, you talk, you write to engage with this technology. And you can get it to do amazing things by doing that. You don't have to be the best computer programmer in the world. You just have to be good with writing and words, which we are as publishers. And lastly, it's fun. I mean, there's loads of fun things you can do with it. I'm not going to list them here. I'm sure you've seen them. Okay, so just briefly then talking about prompts. So everyone who's used ChatGPT, and even if they've just written into it, tell me a joke, that's a prompt. So when you interact with any of these systems, you start by giving them an instruction. So a prompt is that instruction. It could be a question. And the idea is that you're prompting the AI model to give you a specific answer or action back. So it's not exclusively for text-based either. So you can also prompt DALL-E and Midjourney, the image generating models, and can get really beautiful images out. But that's something I haven't delved into that much. But there's a lot of people doing some really interesting stuff with image generation, where they're creating, photorealistic images that are really quite beautiful. So if you're interested in that, you should spend some time looking into that. And I think anyone with a design background or background in photography can take that and really, create some amazing things. Okay, so what makes a good prompt? It usually has a question or instruction, and it usually has extra details. So it's not just write me a poem, it then is write me a poem about X, Y, and Z, and here's an example of what I want. So the more detail you can give it, the more examples you can give it, the better your output is going to be. So OpenAI said, which is the company behind ChatGPT, they said, focus on good prompts in order to get the best information out. So basically they're saying the more detailed and more specific you can be in your prompting, the better the interaction with their model is going to be. So if you think about it, if you want someone to help you and you just say, help me, they're not going to know exactly what you want. They might guess what you want by looking at you or just assuming. But if you say, help me with X, Y, and Z, and this is what I need to do by when, you're going to get a much clearer response to that. All right. Okay, next, what are we thinking about in terms of publishing and educational applications? These are all basic things that you can already do with prompting and with ChatGPT, or what's a new one that just got released in South Africa, Claude. And they all work in a very similar way. A prompt should work in a very similar way across the models. But you can summarize stuff. You can do it really well. So you could, take it, for example, in a book, you could get a chapter summary, ask for the key points. You can generate questions, which is one of my use cases I'll talk about later. It's a formative assessment that can be used by a teacher for a quiz. You can use it to extract information. So if you gave it a large body of text, you could ask it to pull out all the names of people, for example, or pull out the dates, or any citations. So it's very useful for that type of thing, which would technically, I guess, be an editor's job before. Text generation is the big one. Everyone has seen there's been 1 million blog posts published every hour through ChatGPT. Some of them are not very good quality, but basically the barrier to creating some kind of text content is so low now. Anyone can sit there and within a few prompts have a blog post or an article ready for publication. Where it gets more interesting, you can look at things like text classification. So it can take, for example, a list of questions and then classify them according to a subject, which is really quite useful if you have some kind of digital assessment product that you want to put questions into. It's actually surprisingly good at lesson planning. So for teachers, you can, publishers would always and still do with their textbooks and teachers' guides, they would produce lesson plans for teachers, which would be a sort of free add-on. But ChatGPT can do it and do it much better than what we would do. Not much better, but as good as. And then tutoring. Tutoring is a massive one. I think some people might have read about that digital tutoring company, which basically went bankrupt a month after ChatGPT came on the scene, because people who are paying for a digital tutoring service just started using ChatGPT. You can put a prompt in that guides it to tutor you on pretty much anything. Okay, so some strategies. There's no correct or dummy's guide to prompt writing yet, although maybe there has been produced one, you never know. But these are just some strategies, and obviously the best way to learn about what you want it to do for you is to use it. And I think one of the sort of thought leaders in the field said recently, the way to find out use cases is by use. So the more you use it, the more you'll sort of start to work out what you can use it for. But some strategies, the act as a strategy is really good. So you can give the model a role. You can ask it to be a content editor, and then it will be particularly careful about your grammar and punctuation. You could ask it to be a science teacher and get it to review some text, and it should then pull things out that a science teacher would pull out. A historian, or when it comes to business, you can ask it to be a business analyst and get them to ask questions and write a report. Yeah, so it's basically any role you can think of, but obviously a role that's useful for the task that you want it to do. Okay, the importance of clarity and specificity, which is one of my words I can never say properly. So you need to be clear and specific. So you could say, for example, summarize this text and give it a chunk of text, which it will summarize it. But the better way to do it would be to summarize this 600-word business case study into a 100-word overview. And then you're going to get a much better summary because you've given it some sort of guidelines to do that. The other thing is to think about context and criteria. So these models have been trained on a huge amount of data and know everything that's ever been put on the internet. Now, in order for it to be useful, you have to bring it down to your little task, which is small and specific. So you can do that by giving some sort of context. So the context could be, I work at Cambridge University Press, and this is the mission goals of the organization. This is the project I'm doing. So you sort of give it that sort of context. And then criteria could be, oh, I want you to do this, but use a framework, a specific framework, or I want you to output in a specific way with bullet points. So you kind of then crafting the output in that example. And then the final point is to use examples. So there's if you just ask it a question, write me a song. That's called zero-shot prompting. So there's it's just one shot, and you're asking it, and it's going to give you back whatever. But there's something called few-shot prompting, which is a strategy to say, write me a song, and then you give it 3 songs, and you say, it must be like one of these 3 songs. So it will then write a song based on those 3 songs or those 3 examples that you've given. So you can get a much better type of response when you add those examples. All right, so now we're sort of jumping a bit more into the nitty-gritty. So we're talking about an approach called prompt templating. And the idea is that you take a structured approach to writing a prompt. And it's very useful, I found, because it gets you thinking through what you need to do. And it also is very useful because it helps you to replicate certain outputs from the model. So you can get an expected result from what you've done. So the idea with prompt templating is that you think through a goal that you want to complete, or you want to, I guess, collaborate with the AI model on. So you've got one big goal. You break that down into tasks. So what would the tasks that you as a human would need to do to complete that goal? And then for each task, you write a prompt. And so you can then add in some variables. So a variable could be in square brackets, something like input the company goals. So you could have a variable in that as well. And the whole approach has these 5 steps that you follow, which I'm going to run through with you shortly. Okay, then the second thing I want to talk about just before we jump into the prompt formatting of the prompt templating is just to talk about formatting. And this is something which I've picked up and it seems to work really well. It's the idea of making your prompts structured. And to do that, you add headers to them. You add bullet points you add bold and emphasis. And the idea is that then gives some sort of guidance to the structure of your input prompt that the model can read better. And to do that, we use something called Markdown. And Markdown is a markup language, and it's similar to HTML, very easy to learn. I'll show you an example of one. It basically, you put like I think a hashtag, and that means it's a header. But Markdown is the language that the model uses when it outputs text to you. So when you see the structured output and it's got headers and bullet points, it's actually using Markdown. So you then are giving it an instruction, a prompt, using the sort of structured framework that it understands and would provide to you back. Okay, so this is now an example where I'm going to run through everything that I've just spoken about. So we're going to do a templated approach to writing a prompt. And in this example, I want the model to help me write an article. So the main goal is an article. And I have broken it down into 3 tasks. So the first task is to interview me to get the information for the article. The second task is to create an article outline. And the third task is to write the article. And I've divided it into these 3 tasks because I've assigned a different role to each of these prompts. And you know, I could, I guess, put it all in one prompt, but it would be a mega prompt, I guess. And it seems that the systems work better with just one prompt per conversation. The other thing I'm doing here, and you'll see, is I'm using the output from one prompt as the input from the next. So it's called chain prompting. And I'm doing it very manually, where I'm just copying and pasting the output from the one prompt as the input into the next prompt. But pretty soon, and I'm sure people are doing it already, you could link these through automatically. So you'd have, forget what the term is, but there's a term for that, where the system, you write the prompts, and the system actually then just manages the whole input and output process itself, you know, giving you what you want at the end, the final main goal. I am not clever enough to do that yet, but watch this space. Okay, so this is now the 5-section approach I'm taking to getting these prompts written. First one is define the goal of objective. You can see in the example I'm using, it's write an article for an online magazine. It's all pretty straightforward, but there are various stages that we need to do in order to get to that. Okay, so the second section is the actual plan on how we're going to do it. So we're going to list any inputs required. So earlier on I said you could have variables. One variable is something called a voice paragraph, which basically is a paragraph that tells it to write in a certain style. So if you don't give it any sort of guidance, it just writes as it normally would. But you can, for example, give it guidance on how to write, and that's called a voice paragraph, and it then lists things like tone, how you use certain phrases, you know, be authoritative and professional, have an opinion, so things like that. So you think through how you want that voice paragraph to be. You can see the outputs have been planned. So there's 3 outputs because I've got 3 prompts. One is a list of answers, the other is an outline, and then the final output is the article being written. And then I've broken the task down into three tasks: ask questions to get content, create an outline, write an engaging article. And then I'm going to break those, or turn those 3 tasks into prompts. So you'll see there is the way it's going to be done. So for each of these, I would then break it down, break the task down, and produce the prompt. And you'll see at the end of this, I just want to show you the section approach, and then I'll show you the actual prompts that we put in. So you have the task description, ask questions to extract meaningful content. The ideas for the prompting strategy: use the questioning approach, act as an analyst. So analysts are good at getting information out. Then you would put the actual prompt there, and you'd put a sample of what you wanted to come out. Okay, and I'm going to quickly run through the last two, and then I'm going to show you the example that we've just spoken about. Section 4 is just a risk. So some types of prompting would have a higher risk of hallucinations. Hallucinations are when it, for example, gives you a fake reference or a a set of fake information. And so there just needs to be then strategies to deal with that. So how would you fix that? One would be to have a human editor check everything. And then the third one is testing and measurement. Before we go into production, you test your prompt to see if it produces what you want, and then do some kind of iterative process to get the prompt working as you want. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight into it. And now we're getting into the, I guess, the nitty gritty of it all. So this is then the prompt one from that, the structure I've just run through with you, the templating structure. And you can see it's been formatted using Markdown. So the hashtags, they denote a header. And then down at the bottom under output, you can see there's bullet points by the hyphens, and bold is in the executive summaries and bold. So there's two stars. But Markdown will take you like 5 minutes to learn. You can Google it and you'll see how easy it is. Okay, so for the first prompt, and this was the prompt where I wanted the AI model to ask me questions to get information out that then could be used for this article. So you can see I've given it a role, act as a business analyst tasked with understanding the intricacies of a new product, service, or process in the realm of educational technology and digital learning. I've given it some context. You employed at a top-tier management consultancy. Your mandate is to produce easily digestible, comprehensive reports. And now the task is to conduct an interview with a product development manager responsible for new educational technology product, and to ask questions about it. To get that data from the product manager, and then to write a report. And then I've given it an example of what I want the report to look like. So you can see it's pretty detailed, but it's structured in a way that it's easy for a human to read and then easy for the machine to read. And it is a very clear task, and my output is very clear. I've told it exactly what I want. And I should be able to show you on the next slide. Yes, so then this is then the output of that process, where the model asked me all these questions, and it was about an educational technology chatbot. And then you can see it provided an executive summary and wrote a report based on the interview it had with me as the person, the human, which is very useful. It's a great way to get information out of your head, in a sort of very structured way, and then also to get something written into a nice report. Okay, so that was then the first prompt's output, which then became the second prompt's input. So now you can see I've given it another role. This is prompt number 2. And I said you're a communications specialist. Your expertise lies in distilling internal reports into compelling narratives for a broader external audience. I gave it some context in the communications department. And then the task was to review the internal report, which we just got extracted by the model in the prompt before, and then create an outline for an article to convey what this product is about. And you can see there in square brackets, I've got insert the internal report here for review. And that's then the output of prompt 1. And again, I've given in sort of guidance on the output. So what I want, detailed outline for the article, suggested title. You can see all that stuff there. Okay, so this then is put into the AI model along with the report from the first prompt, and we end up with a very good output, which is an outline of an article. So it's taken that information that the first prompt got, and it's given it a suggested title. It's then given it the introduction and the main sections and bullet points underneath all of that. and then this output would then be used for the final prompt, which is to get the model to write it up in an article following this article structure. So I'm just going to quickly go through that, and then we onto use cases. Almost need to have a tea break. So this then is the final prompt in that sort of 3-prompt goal that we set out at the beginning, and this is then to write an article. So I've given it a role of a distinguished freelance writer, commissioned by media outlets to produce articles on technology and business topics. Give it a task to take the article from the management consultancy and write an article using the article outline, which we got from the first prompt, and the tone and voice paragraph, which we have sitting on the side, and we're putting that in, and then giving it some guidance on what the article should be. Yeah, so you can see it's a, I would say it's time consuming and tricky to set up one of these prompt chains. Once it's done, we can just change variables in it. We could be like, oh, write an article about, you know, the rugby game on Saturday, for example. And then again, it could run through this whole process of interviewing someone, taking that information, turning it into a report. The next prompt takes the report on the rugby game, turns it into an article, and then the final prompt would then write that article. All right, I'm just going to have a sip of tea, and then I'm going to just talk about 4 use cases, and then I think we can open the floor to discussion. Okay, so all these use cases that I'm sort of presenting now, and you know, there's a million really. It's whatever you can think of, you could probably do. But these are ones where I thought there could be some value to an educational publisher, or there could be some value to the education system. So that's sort of what has guided these projects. And they're all working use cases where we need to decide whether we're going to develop them further or not. But the first one is one of my favorites, or that's so far. But the idea is that publishers, as part of what they do teacher training. So we train teachers on a new curriculum, for example, this coding and robotics curriculum, and they come for like a 2-day training. They get like a little booklet to go home with, but quite often they need additional support. Or they, you know, I know when I've gone to sort of any sort of training, I kind of forget about it a week later. You need to almost have constant reminders of what it was about, and you know how to then incorporate it into your life. So this idea for this one is that we would set up a professional development chatbot, which would then assist teachers who have been to some kind of training from Cambridge to then ask questions or check anything that they've learned, or get guidance on how to implement the content that they've learned. This is then the base prompt. So to set up a chatbot, you have to have some sort of base prompt, and you can see I've given it the role and name of an experienced chatbot called chatbot named Coding and Robotics TeachBot. Your role is to provide professional development to foundation phase teachers on the subject of coding and robotics. Your goal is to help teachers understand the concepts and skills related to coding and robotics. To engage the teachers, start by asking them about their thoughts on coding, and then it sort of runs through a whole, I guess, conversation design on what the chatbot should be doing and how it should be operating. And just to say, it's using freely available content at the moment. So just content, curriculum content. So I've got a little video of it working. It's working through Telegram, which I'm not sure if anyone uses, but it's just similar to WhatsApp. But you can see in this scenario, I'm the teacher who's done the training, and now I'm asking the chatbot to provide me with some more information. So I'm asking things a teacher could potentially ask, you know, some content knowledge. It's pretty fast in returning the information. I've asked it to provide some simple definitions. You can see if it takes a little bit longer, it means it's thinking a bit more and that there's more content to be produced. But this is all real time, which I think is pretty good. And the idea is that the teacher or a student, in fact, could have this tutor in their pocket available on a mobile device they use, and very accessible. So, you know, you don't need to have a laptop, you don't need to learn a new software application, you can do it in your chat application. So you can see how this is a complete extension from what a publisher would normally do, but could be linked to a textbook or some kind of teacher training or some digital platform. There's definitely connections that we can make there. Okay, I'm going to skip to the next one, but I can, you know, I can send anyone who's interested the link and they can play around with it. It's live on Telegram at the moment. We're doing some user testing. Okay, so this one is probably more practical in the sense that it has immediate uses. And so this is a process set up to get the AI model to produce formative assessment. So formative assessment is assessment for learning, such as quizzes in a class, any sort of short tests and things like that, that basically tell the learner if they've understood a concept, and gives some sort of indication to a teacher if there's sort of gaps in content from a classroom, or anything like that. They're not high stakes at all. They're just short little quizzes, but teachers have to write them. It takes a lot of time. They're always asking for publishers to produce more assessment or more activities, and this is one approach to do it. So this is the sort of prompt that we use to set it up. So it's given the prompt of a specialist in diagnostic assessments, and the context is that they're generating school-based formative assessment questions, and then I give some sort of assessment specifications. So it's Bloom's taxonomy. You've got to align with that and ask for an answer for feedback on the incorrect answer. And then you can see the task says, I would like to generate a set of 20 questions for grade 7 students in the subject of coding and robotics focused on the topic of algorithms and coding. And this is all very coding and robotics based because I'm working with that at the moment. Okay, so you can see that's the sort of guidance. And then I just want to get to where it actually starts running.
Or be able to.
This was just the setup. I want to just show you. Okay. So then this is ChatGPT. Everyone's familiar with the window, and you can see now putting in the requirements for that formative assessment. So in this case, I've got it in a spreadsheet, but it's basically just what is Bloom's, what is the subject, what do we need to do with it, and I should be copying the prompt in pretty soon. There we go. It's a problem when you do these video recordings, you kind of forget the process you took. Okay, so I've copied the prompt in. I've added some files which provide some extra context, and then should be saying go any second, which is the bit that I want to show you. All right. Now you can see in this case, ChatGPT is actually working as a collaborator with the user. So I've provided a whole lot of content, I've provided some guidelines, and then it's going to ask me questions as it works through what we need to do to generate this formative assessment. See, that's behind the brains of ChatGPT, what it's doing. Okay, so now it has reviewed everything. Going through all the requirements of that spreadsheet. It's pretty much just reading everything that I'm giving it to it, and it's basically then taking action based on this prompt. Sorry, this is quite a technical demonstration. I don't think it would take so long. We can delve into
I think it's really great. I can
Okay.
imagine that it's difficult to watch yourself record.
No, I didn't think it would take so long. Okay, so you can see it's basically working through everything. And this is the work that you would get a content generator to do, you know, a sort of teacher or a specialist to work with you on this, and you're basically working with this model. Obviously, anything that it produces needs to be checked by that teacher or specialist, but you know, you're doing a whole lot of the work up front. Okay, and then it goes. And now this is just one, you know, content type that I've selected to work with the AI to kind of get this proof of concept going. But I mean, technically, we could be doing anything with it. You know, this is formative assessment, but you could, you know, be doing a list of bullet points around a certain subject, or, you know, key takeaways of something, or, you know, there's a whole lot of things in publishing and in book publishing that you could actually be working with this on to get at least a base level of content out of it. Okay, I'm just going to let it go until it produces the first questions, and then I'm skipping to the next one because it is getting too long for my...
Hillary, do you want to ask a question?
If I may, while this is generating on screen, is there a formula in terms of information hierarchy that you need to enter? So do you always start with, I can't remember what the order was, but do you always start with context, then task, then, and if you're not, and if you get that hierarchy, if that hierarchy isn't correct, then will it misinterpret the prompt?
So obviously prompting is very much a science in development, or whatever it would be. So, you know, there's so many people have different approaches, but what the general suggestion is that you start with role, then context. So you're basically saying, this is what you are, this is where you are and what you're doing. And then you go on to task, so tell it what you want it to do, and then whatever you want to input as additional information, and then the output you'd like. So that seems to be the best process for it to flow through. But I mean, obviously you can mix that around and you still will get a response. I don't think it's going to break it. It's got something called, I forget what the term is, but basically it remembers, which is or probably not the correct term for that, but basically whatever you put in last, it's going to keep that in the memory for the longest. So that's why you put in the output last, because that's what you wanted to output as. Okay, so you can see it's then produced those questions, and I'm just going to scroll back. You can see. So it's produced the questions, it's given the answer, it's given my Bloom's level, it's given the difficulty level and the type of question. So I think I just asked for 5 in this example, but you could ask for, you know, 20. And then the next step is it actually exports a file for you, so a CSV that you could then do what you like with. Yes, so I think there's a lot of potential here, and you know, you need to do proper sort of workflows and build in proofreading or checking, and you know, just you know, you have to be careful of all those sorts of things. But for basic work like this, where you could potentially ask someone to do it and get it back in 2 weeks, you know, you could actually have it done in 2 minutes. And you can then just download everything. There it is. Okay, so this I think is going to be a big one. This type of use case. I don't know. I mean, there must be a million other content types you could do in a similar way. So I'm sure clever people will start thinking of those things. This other one is just really something I played around with, and it kind of solves the problem, and it does something quite quickly, which is good. But you know, it's also something that we can do quite easily ourselves. So before we start a project, so whether we're making a book or some kind of digital product, we obviously work with a curriculum and then create some kind of book plan, which would then guide the development of the book. So in this scenario, I then worked with the model to develop the book plan. So to take the curriculum and then help me to structure it into a plan for a book. And then there was very much a two-part process. The first part was to look at a very sort of skeletons-based outline that the model would produce from the curriculum doc. And then the second phase was to get it to actually put a bit more detail into it. So something that I call zero draft manuscripts. It's not even a first draft. It's basically just a very detailed book plan, or almost like a template. So to do that, we used this prompt here. So I gave it the role of an education specialist, and I said we're going to collaborate on developing a comprehensive learning module aimed at 13-year-olds, and I used the B7 Ghana computing curriculum, which was a curriculum I was working with at the time. Our goal is to create well-structured and enriching learning experiences, incorporating various types of activities. What responsibilities did I give it? To create the content points. So each topic to have key learning points and essential questions, and then also activity questions as well. And you can see the process was two-part: initial development, which was basically just an outline, which then I reviewed and said, go for it. And the second one was producing this zero draft manuscript. And this was just a bit of the output. I mean, I haven't edited it at all, but you can see it's structured it according to the curriculum doc. It's given me the key learning points, which have been written out with some suggestions, and then given me some essentials questions for this module. And there's all those other requirements are here as well, but just didn't fit on the slide. But this then could be taken quite easily, I think, by a subject specialist and developed out further. It has the sort of really good rough guideline. It has suggestions for activities which you could delete and replace with your own, but it just gives you something to start with. So it's no longer staring at a blank page. You get quite a lot of foundational book structure out of something like this. Again, I haven't done this much further than just a little experiment with this one module, but it seems like a very useful tool, and I'm surprised, we're not using it more for projects. Okay, and this one is kind of fun. So this is just looking at how an existing piece of content. So in this case, I wrote something about Bloom's taxonomies a few years back and put it online more as an experiment. I was more interested in learning about Amazon's ecosystem than anything else. So it's not the greatest piece of work I've ever done, I must admit. But I just thought, okay, at some point I have to update it or take it down. And so I thought maybe I could use ChatGPT to assist with that updating process. And obviously this could be then related to any piece of content or any book that's out of date or anything like that. So the way I had thought through it was to get the model to review a piece of text, so to provide that text to the model and then provide suggestions for edits and improvements, and to put them in square brackets. So much like an editor would edit a piece of text using track changes, I wanted to see what the edits were and then to decide whether to implement them or not. And then I had 2 different prompts, which I think I put them both here, but basically just to run through them from the perspective of 2 different people, so 2 different roles, to then get a much more varied and detailed type of response that I could then look at and either consolidate them or choose one over the other. Okay, so I'm going to just talk through these 2 prompts and then I'll show you one of the outputs. So this was as I said, a little piece of text I did on Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm giving it the role of a dedicated teacher who is enthusiastic about the use of technology and to enhance their teaching and learning. I asked it to review the instructional text with a focus on technology and to see if anything should be changed or updated. As I mentioned, this was a few years old. And then to give a response format, provide the text to replace in square brackets. And then I gave it some context. The instructional text is aimed at teachers and educational professionals who are experienced and knowledgeable about Bloom's taxonomy, but want to understand how best to use the framework when teaching online or using digital tools and technologies. So you can see you have to actually know what you want, and I guess know the industry in a way in order to get the best prompt out. You can't just say make this better. I mean, you could, but you have to the more you know about what you want, I think the easier it is to get out what you want. And then under the input text was the existing text. And then the second prompt was to act as a teacher trainer who specializes in providing guidance on how best to use Bloom's taxonomy in the classroom. And then this was a gap analysis to sort of run through the text and see where there were gaps and where things could be improved or added to. And again, I asked it to use the square brackets to provide additional text. Okay, and I think that's the one I've got on the next slide. So you can see this was a little piece of text on understanding, which I think is the second level of Bloom's. And everything in red is what it suggested needed to be added to the text in order to flesh it out and fill in any gaps. So you can see it's almost like double what was there, or probably even more. I mean, I haven't edited it or read it. I've just sort of copied and pasted it here, but it seems from a brief scan that it would make the text better. And I guess the next step here would be to look at these outputs and decide whether to incorporate them into the existing text, or sort of or part thereof. All right, so I have been talking for almost an hour. Over to you.
I